Welcome back to the illumilands podcast. In this episode, I want to get a conversation started about the oh-so-famous Kalam Cosmological Argument. For those who don't know, I already have a number of videos on the Kalam Cosmological Argument that I made a few years ago. So, if you aren't familiar with the Kalam, I'd recommend watching those videos first. Especially my overview video. It should be the very first one. To make things interesting and to dig deeper into the subject, I've decided to respond directly to my overview video. Whereas that video is meant to be a beginner level intro to the Kalam, I want these next podcast episodes, and I say episodes, plural, because it certainly will not get done in this sole podcast episode. Probably go another episode or two. I'm not actually quite sure yet, but it just depends on where my studies take me. But anyway, that video is supposed to be a beginner level intro to the Kalam. On the other hand, I want these next podcast episodes to be sort of the perfect intermediate level introduction to the Kalam. Something that is more in depth than my overview video and makes probably some better points that are much needed, but it's still not so technical that you're just left, bored, frankly. So, without further ado, here is the clip of me introducing the Kalam Cosmological Argument. The argument goes as follows. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The defense for the first premise, that whatever begins to exist has a cause, typically relies at least somewhat on rational intuition. That is, it just seems intuitively true. It doesn't make sense that something could just pop into being out of nothing for utterly no reason. To many people, this fact is just so obvious, it's simply taken as foundational. Many have pointed out that rational intuition can be, at the very least, a tricky thing to navigate. Sometimes our rational intuition can be confirmed by accurate prediction making, but other times it can definitely lead us astray. We think something simply must be the case. It feels so true. But we all know it's not unheard of for these intuitions to be wrong. Maybe the best objection to using intuition as support for premise 1 is that when we're talking of something as far off and unique as the beginning of the entire universe, our intuitions just might not be reliable guides to truth. Humans have evolved to understand a world of medium-sized objects, not the biggest or smallest objects like atoms or galaxy clusters. This might be why Einstein's relativity theory, which states how large-scale objects work, and quantum physics, which states how small-scale objects work, both give rise to very unintuitive results, and especially quantum physics. The Big Bang would have been a quantum event, so we must be extremely cautious about stretching our intuitions to explain it. As the philosopher David Hume said regarding similar matters, argumentation has carried us quite beyond the reach of our faculties. So I personally find this objection somewhat persuasive. It definitely helps to pull the reins back on our confidence in rational intuition, especially rational intuition about cosmic matters, the beginning of the universe. But the devil is in the details. how much confidence should we have in our intuition? It's not really clear. If the objector is just saying that we should be cautious when reasoning from intuition about the beginning of the universe, then I don't know what right-thinking person would disagree. And I think the proponent of the Kalam would say they are paying their due caution. If, on the other hand, the objector is claiming that rational intuition can't even be weak evidence for premise one, I think they're surely overstepping their bounds. All else being equal, it's a better sign if our intuitions agree with some explanation than if the explanation is counterintuitive. Our intuitive notions of what is and isn't rational should provide some evidence, even if that evidence is underwhelming. And when I say underwhelming, what I mean is that it's evidence, just not enough on its own that we should be convinced of the truth of premise one. This objection seems to show that if we want to accept premise one with high confidence, we need something more than the evidence of intuition. We're dealing in territory for which rational intuition is known to have been incorrect on past occasions. So it might well be mistaken here as well. We're on shaky grounds if the only support for premise one is that it seems intuitive. That, I think, is what we can gather from this objection. But intuition can still, like I say, provide some evidence, an explanation that was totally counterintuitive. Like I said before, the counterintuitiveness of that explanation might well lead someone to think it's less plausible than another explanation that seems much more intuitive. But with all that said, I move on to the next clip. There's at least one reason to support the idea that something can't come from nothing. If things really could come into being from nothing, then it doesn't make any sense why anything and everything couldn't come from nothing. Quoting from William Lane Craig, why is it only universes which can come out of nothing? What makes nothingness so discriminatory? It makes sense that if things could come into being from nothing, then we should see things popping into existence all the time. But the fact that we don't see things popping into existence for no reason all the time supports the idea that things just can't come from nothing. Although I personally find this argument pretty convincing, there's generally one response that opponents make. We're used to the cause and effect that goes on in this universe. But is it inconceivable that outside our universe, causation might work differently? Or maybe not at all? Maybe causation applies within space and time, but not beyond space and time. We've only ever experienced life within space and time, so how do we know? In our universe, things work a certain way. Why should things different than the universe not work in different ways? In other words, is it reasonable to extend our normal understanding of causality within the universe to all of causality, or even just causality outside or beyond the universe? Now, there could be much said in response to this question, but here's what I find most significant. First, we can't confuse the causal principle that everything that begins to exist has a cause for a law or the laws of the universe. Some might associate the causal principle with, say, the first law of thermodynamics, which says that new energy can't simply pop into existence and add to the universe's total energy. Certainly, the universe could have operated according to different laws. What atoms do in this universe could have been completely different. Or maybe the laws could make it so there wouldn't even be atoms. But none of this sheds light on whether something could, given different conditions, come into existence from absolutely nothing, literally uncaused. In fact, one wonders what relevance, quote-unquote, pre-existing conditions have in determining whether something can come from nothing. This leads precisely to my second point. Nothingness, in quotes, or simply nothing, is not a thing. There is no such thing that is nothing, or nothingness. Nothing is not a thing, but merely a linguistic way of referring to a complete absence of anything, including any pre-existing conditions, properties, or potentiality. As such, if some pre-existing condition is required for something to come into existence, if a prerequisite must be in place for something to begin to exist, then the existence of that thing implies it didn't come from nothing. Similarly, nothingness cannot possibly have a preference towards what types of things can come into being from nothing, because that would require assigning a property to this nothingness, i.e., the property of preferring type X over type Y, or preferring this type over that type, which is a contradiction, given that nothing, or quote-unquote nothingness, again, is not an actual thing, and you can't ascribe properties to non-things. Therefore, if something can come into being from nothing, then by necessity, anything can come into being from nothing in any circumstance. Nothingness either admits absolutely nothing, or it admits absolutely everything. But it can't admit some things and not other things. If it admits absolutely everything in all circumstances, then we should have plenty of examples of different types of objects inexplicably and randomly coming into existence from nothing. There's no reason why this wouldn't be taking place constantly, because whatever reason there would be implied by something that exists, and so it wouldn't be nothing. We have yet to see a single uncontroversial example of this in all human history, and in just all of the universe's history. We have never had an uncontroversial example of anything coming into existence from absolutely nothing. This leads me, at least, to the conclusion that most likely nothing comes from nothing. Everything that begins to exist comes from something. That is, it has a cause. And with that, we reach the end of this episode. So, thank you very much for listening and supporting the channel. It truly means a lot. It means the world to me to have people actually listening to these podcasts. So, again, thank you. It's actually become my goal now to make YouTube and podcasting a source of income. I would really, really like to be able to cut back on hours at my actual day job. That is honestly just a dream of mine, really. But I would love to make that happen. So your listening helps make that one step closer to being a reality. I get so much enjoyment out of researching these issues and sharing that research with basically just anyone else interested. And of course, if you really liked this episode, you can subscribe by hitting that red subscribe button. I think it's still red. I don't know why YouTube would ever change it. I am almost certain it is still red. So, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.